boy whispered. He wore a police coat. That was all it took to unravel Pine County's trust. Detective Jack Miller and his K-9 partner Rex dig into a case where children are lured by counterfeit uniforms hidden in tunnels and nearly vanished forever on freight trains. Each lead reveals betrayal closer to home until Jack faces a mastermind who hides behind a smile. And in the end, only Rex's sacrifice can stop him. This is not just a story about crime, it's about loyalty beyond life itself. Like, subscribe, and uncover the truth with us. The county road unspooled in front of Detective Jack Miller like a ribbon of old tape. Faded striping frost, heaves, patched and repatched cottonwoods leaning in as if to listen. Evening had crossed the town line an hour ago. Now the last light hung low over the Arkansas Valley, the sky the color of bruised plums. Jack drove with one palm on the wheel and the other resting near the console where Rex's steady breath rose and fell like a metronome. The German Shepherd filled the back seat, ears forward, nose sampling the current sneaking through the window vent. "You smell it before I do, partner," Jack said, his voice a sanded-down whisper, the kind a man uses after too many graveside eulogies. Rex's tail thumped, once restrained, as if to say, attention is not celebration. The radio crackled with the quiet business of a small department traffic stops, a loose steer on County Route 6, a welfare check by the grain silos. Deputy Tom Walker signed off from one stop and signed on for another, his voice brisk and affable. Tom was 10 years younger, quick with a grin, quicker on paperwork, good in a fight, but better at making a citizen feel heard. Jack trusted him the way a man trusts routine, not absolutely, but enough to keep going. He turned onto a service road that paralleled the rail line and slowed. The county had placed orange barrels there a decade ago and then forgot them. Between two barrels sat a delivery truck like an abandoned stage prop, white box cab door cracked, one headlight clouded by dust. Jack's headlights rolled across the logo on the driver's door. Prairie Star Logistics. He hadn't seen that company in years. He thumbed the mic. "Dispatch Miller on County E near mile 14. I've got a box truck, no hazards, door ajar. Plate to follow." The reply came soft and distant. He parked at an angle lights, bathing the truck, and stepped out. The air smelled like hay and engine coolant with a stray thread of something metallic that made his tongue go dry. He let Rex out, clipped a lead more for ritual than need, and gave the command. Check. Rex flowed toward the truck shoulders, low gait, smooth as poured ink. He sampled the ground by the front tire, then the door seam, then the step. He paused and lifted his nose to the door handle, and a tremor moved through his frame. Excitement disciplined into focus. Jack felt the echo of it under his ribs. He pulled a nitrile glove and eased the door open farther, careful not to smear prints. The cab was empty, the seat pushed back by someone with long legs. A fast food bag lay crumpled on the floorboard straw, still sheathed a smear of ketchup dried into a rust-colored star. On the passenger seat, half tucked into the crack, was a small blue knit glove. Not a mitt for winter chores, a child's glove with a white stripe. Jack did not breathe for one long second. He set the glove back exactly where it had been and swept the flashlight beam along the footwell. Dots of something dark tracked from the threshold to the seat. He leaned in. The dots had the dull brown of old blood. "Rex," he said. The dog had already moved, nose pressed to the rubber floor mat, then to the threshold of the cargo box. He stood there, ears tight, then gave one short contained bark that made the hairs on Jack's neck stand up. It was not alarm. It was certainty. Jack circled to the rear. The cargo door was down padlock, hanging from an eyelet, but the shackle had been cut and set back to look intact. A magician's lock. He lifted gently. The door rattled up a foot, then two, and a wave of cold air slid out, tinged with disinfectant and something stale. He stopped there, resisting the urge to rip it high and flood the space with light. The scene needed to be read, not smudged. He crouched and shone his beam along the floor. No crates. No pallets. Just a tarp spread flat, creased from recent folding, along with 3 empty water bottles, a strip of duct tape still clinging to a frayed thread, and near the far wall a bungee cord with 1 broken hook. Rex lay, sphinx-like nose pointed under the lifted door, drawing scent eyes bright with that sober alertness Jack had come to rely on more than his own breath. He straightened and keyed the mic. "Dispatch, I need Tom on my location and a forensic unit if we can spare it. Possible scene, possible child-related." He paused, measuring the words so they wouldn't tremble. "Also run Prairie Star logistics status of the company." The answer took a minute, which in a situation like this was a small eternity. Jack used that minute. He let Rex into the cargo space and gave the soft command for a scent picture. The dog traced a looping infinity along the tarp edges, paused at each bottle, then pressed his muzzle into the seam where floor met side panel. He whined almost imperceptibly, then snapped his gaze to the front bulkhead. There, a thumb-sized smear of brown marred the metal wiped once, not well. Jack marked it with a paper tent from his pocket kit. He could almost hear his late wife's voice, a nurse who used to remind him that small things told the truth. Bruises where a story said there were none, a forgetting that wasn't really forgetting. Small things had haunted the last decade of his life, the empty space at the breakfast table, the voicemail he never erased. A set of headlights slid up the service road and Tom's cruiser eased to a stop. Tom stepped out, hat tucked under his arm, looking from Jack to the truck with a question he didn't voice. "What do we have?" "Staged abandonment," Jack said. "Box is clean, too clean. Child-size glove in the cab, old blood specks, tarp laid flat. Lock was cut and reset. Someone wanted us to find this, but not them." Tom's face folded into a grim line. "You think transport?" "I think a pause point." Jack inclined his head toward Rex, who was now nose-pressing at the bulkhead's lower seam. "He's telling us there was a body here recently, maybe more than one, and not deceased." Tom swallowed. "Dispatch says Prairie Star went belly up 8 years ago," he said, glancing at his phone. "Bank seizure liquidation. No active licenses, no current filings. If this truck's in their name, someone is ghosting paperwork." The word ghosting landed like frost. Jack looked again at the logo, at the paint that hadn't been refreshed in a long while, at the plates that needed a closer look under better light. "We need to treat this as a false front," he said. "Run the VIN, not just the plate. Canvass the rail spur for cameras. Whoever parked this wanted isolation and predictable patrol routes." He felt the map of the county overlay itself across his mind. Feed stores, fairgrounds, the garden supply lot that closed at 6, the way fog pooled in the low cut where the creek went under the road. Tom loop around to the grain elevator access and check for tire impressions beyond the barrels. "I'll preserve what I can here." Tom nodded and moved off, careful to walk the shoulder. Jack shot additional photographs, labeled each, and stood still to listen. Trains moaned far off, a fox barked in the hedgerow, and somewhere a wind chime told the wind that it had come again. In the cab, he bagged the fast food refuse and the straw. In the box, he lifted the bottles with a gloved hand, each sticky with the faint sweetness of sports drink. Under the tarp, pressed into the plywood, were 3 small parallel grooves, as if a plastic crate had slid and then stopped abruptly. Rex huffed impatient with human slowness. "What do you have, boy?" The dog moved to the rear corner and nosed a panel seam. Jack ran a fingernail along it and felt adhesive that hadn't cured completely. He worked the edge, peeled back a hand-sized patch of duct tape cloth, and revealed a small magnetic tracker, the kind sold to parents nervous about teen drivers. Batteries new. Jack's mind sketched the pattern and old logo to blend in a tracker to monitor a stage to cause concern but not panic. That meant a plan tethered to clockwork. He pictured a child's blue glove again and felt something tender and fierce pinch behind his sternum. Tom returned with news that made the night feel narrower. "Fresh ruts beyond the barrels," he said. "Mud splatter on the tall grass. Someone cut through the ditch to the service path that runs behind the hardware depot. They knew where the cameras don't reach." Jack nodded. "Then they know our roots," he said softly. "And they count on us being exactly who we are." He looked at the tracker in his palm, the glove in the evidence bag, the logo on the door. The truck wasn't a mistake. It was a message. He looked down at Rex, who stared back with that steady, almost human patience. "We'll read it," Jack said to the dog, to himself, to the dusk, settling into full dark. All the way through. Far off, a church bell marked the hour. Jack closed the cargo door to 3 inches, enough for airflow but not entry. Set a cruiser light to pulse as a warning and felt the night lean closer. The first move had been made. He would answer with care, not noise. He slid a hand along Rex's ruff, felt the warmth and muscle and will beneath the coat. "Easy," he murmured. "We start here." Rex's tail pattered once against the bumper, a quiet drum in the hush. The wind shifted and the metallic thread grew stronger. It pointed somewhere they couldn't see yet, but the line felt taut between this truck and whatever came next. Jack radioed to request a tow with evidence chain, a forensic sweep, and a list of decommissioned lots where a truck could loiter unseen. He added a note: pull bankruptcy files on Prairie Star cross-reference any assets that didn't make auction. When he put the mic back, the county felt different, like walking the same hallway and noticing a door that hadn't been there yesterday. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it in his bones. The barn might be empty, the box might be clean, but the air was telling the truth, and Rex had heard it first. The morning after the truck discovery, Detective Jack Miller drove with Rex riding alert in the back seat, the dog's amber eyes following every fence post and mailbox as the cruiser rolled deeper into the county's back roads. Jack had slept in his chair at the station, reports, half-finished evidence bags, sealed photographs, cataloged his mind, looping over the staged truck, the blue glove, the magnetic tracker. Now a new lead had come through. Dispatch an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, reported by a farmer who said he saw a faint light there the week before. Jack knew the address. It once belonged to Thomas Reed, a social worker who had been considered reliable, steady, the kind of man neighbors trusted with their children in emergencies. Reed had retired early a decade ago and sold the house, and then the property shifted hands twice until foreclosure left it empty. Jack parked by the sagging gate gravel, crunching sun lifting behind him in a thin autumn sky. The house stood gray and weary windows, clouded with dust porch rails leaning outward, yet the lock on the front door shone newer than the siding around it. That detail scraped against Jack's instincts. He let Rex down and issued the command. The dog's muscles bunched with readiness, his nose carving invisible trails in the cool air. The yard smelled of dry leaves, creosote from the nearby rail ties, and underneath something stale, almost sweet. Jack tried the knob. It gave with surprising ease, though the lock appeared intact, another magician's trick. Inside, the air carried a chill of disuse mixed with bleach. Sunlight angled through torn curtains, illuminating an empty living room stripped bare. No furniture, no rugs, no forgotten photographs, just faint outlines on the walls where frames once hung. Jack's eyes traced the floorboards. Dust lay, even except where swirls suggested something had been dragged recently. He followed the swirls to the kitchen. Cabinets yawned, open shelves, empty refrigerator unplugged and odorless. It was too clean a sterility that came not from abandonment, but from deliberate wiping. Rex's nails clicked softly as he moved across the linoleum, nose pressed low. He circled twice, then pawed at a corner seam near the baseboard. Jack crouched. His flashlight revealed a faint brown trace where the linoleum met wood dried into the grain. He touched it with a gloved finger and lifted a flake. Old blood long enough to darken, but still readable to the trained eye, and Rex had known it instantly. Jack felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't a vagrant squatting spot. It had been used and used for something that required hasty erasure. He moved to the hallway. Every door was open, 2 bedrooms, stripped closets, empty bathrooms, spotless to the point of unease. Yet faint lines marked the carpet nap where a bed frame had stood until recently, its impressions still fresh. Rex whined softly at the second bedroom doorway, a high sound that Jack had learned not to dismiss. He stepped inside. The wallpaper bore faded prints of balloons, a child's pattern, and on the sill, sunlight picked out the ghost of adhesive where decals once clung. He crouched again and let Rex guide him. The shepherd pressed nose to floorboard, then looked up with that steady, grave expression. Jack used his knife tip to probe between planks. Something lodged there gave way with a brittle snap. He eased out a small fragment of cloth blue with a white stripe consistent with the glove from the truck. He sealed it instantly, lungs tight, while his mind arranged the pattern: a truck staged with a glove, a house scrubbed but imperfectly, fragments pointing to movement of children through spaces meant to erase them. He stood and took wider stock. The windows had been cleaned recently, streaks angled inward suggesting someone inside wanted visibility out. Yet the curtain rods had been left behind nails, still fresh holes, not dusty. Whoever lived or worked here had no intent of permanence, only control. Jack's radio crackled with Tom Walker's voice. "Anything in there, Jack?" "Too much clean," Jack replied. "But Rex has blood trace in the kitchen and cloth fiber in the child's room. House once belonged to Thomas Reed." Tom was quiet a moment. "Reed, the social worker. He left town, didn't he? Moved south last I heard, but his name keeps echoing." Jack pocketed the evidence bag and walked slowly to the back door. Outside lay a patch of yard once fenced for dogs, now overgrown. A swing-set frame leaned rusting against the shed. Rex padded ahead, nose suddenly alight again, pulling toward the shed's rotted boards. Jack pried the warped door open. Inside only dust and garden tools remained, but the floor showed scuffs recent lighter than the general grime. Someone had been in here not long ago. He swept his beam along the wall. A nail held a coil of nylon rope end frayed. Nearby, a bottle of antiseptic rested upright uncapped. He bagged both. Rex sniffed, then sneezed, irritated by chemical sharpness. Jack straightened, mind racing. This was not just a forgotten house. It had been a station on a route children brought in, hidden, erased. Someone knew how law enforcement moved, knew what forensics could recover, and yet overlooked the dog who could smell what bleach could not erase. Jack photographed everything, then stood on the porch surveying the yard with narrowed eyes. The place hummed with absence, louder than presence. Tom arrived minutes later, brows furrowed at the sight of bagged evidence. "Looks like someone scrubbed it before we got here," he said. "They knew we'd come." "That's the point," Jack answered. "They left just enough behind to prove we're chasing, but not enough to catch." He looked down at Rex, who sat poised, ears like radar eyes alive with unspoken certainty. The dog had drawn them deeper into the labyrinth, nose against silence, patience against deception. Jack exhaled. This was not a simple disappearance. It was design, meticulous and cruel. And now Thomas Reed's name threaded back into the puzzle a man once trusted with children. The question was whether Reed was a ghost from the past or a hand still moving pieces. The day felt heavier as he sealed the scene. The glove fragment, the blood trace, the scrubbed rooms, they all pointed forward to a darkness that had already planned its next move. The evidence from the Reed house had not cooled when a new message arrived at the Pine County Sheriff's Department. A plain envelope with no return address slid into the morning mail, its paper thin, its corners smudged as though passed through several hands before it reached the clerk's desk. Detective Jack Miller was summoned before his coffee had settled. He slit the envelope with his pen, careful, while Rex lay by his boots with ears half raised. Inside lay a single sheet of lined paper, words printed in a hurried script. The note accused Dr. Henry Scott, a well-regarded child psychologist who had worked in the county for 15 years, of concealing information about missing children. Jack's eyes narrowed at the accusation, not because it seemed impossible, but because it came with too much certainty and too little context. He read it twice, then 3 times, his pulse steady, his thoughts circling. Something about the handwriting stirred a faint recognition. He brought the letter into the evidence room, laid it under the glass, and compared it against reports filed in recent years. He moved carefully, lining up loop's angles the way certain letters slanted. When his finger stopped, his stomach tightened. The handwriting bore striking resemblance to that of Deputy Tom Walker, his colleague and long-standing partner in countless cases. The discovery did not bring relief. It brought a cold weight. Jack did not let the thought settle as accusation. Instead, he pulled archived files where Walker's notes had been logged during missing persons investigations. He studied margins, compared signatures, traced each curve. Again and again the similarities repeated. Rex, sensing the change in his handler's breathing, nudged Jack's leg with a cold nose grounding him. Jack placed a hand briefly on Rex's head, then picked up the phone and called the forensics specialist. "I need a handwriting analysis," he said. Priority. He did not name Walker yet. To do so prematurely would corrode trust and spread suspicion before certainty. The hours that followed carried a solemn weight. Jack reviewed older cases, children gone missing in the past 5 years, each file touched at some point by Tom Walker. Some of those cases had been declared cold prematurely, the notes citing lack of leads or families uncooperative. Yet, as Jack examined the timelines, he saw inconsistencies. One report listed an interview time after the witness had already clocked in for work. Another had address numbers transposed, sending follow-up officers to the wrong house. None were catastrophic errors, but together they formed a pattern, subtle misdirection, delays the kind that allowed time to vanish along with children. Jack leaned back in his chair, the files fanned out like fallen leaves. His heart did not want to believe, but his mind assembled the shape of deliberate tampering. He thought of the staged truck, the scrubbed house, the tracker, and now this letter pointing outward toward Dr. Scott. If Walker had written it, the intent was diversion to cast suspicion where it did not belong, to force energy down the wrong path. Jack's memory replayed Walker's voice the night at the truck, calm, competent, almost too steady, when the pieces pointed to something darker. Rex shifted paws, flexing as though restless with the weight of his handler's silence. Jack rose and left the office. He needed fresh air, needed to stand where he could look at the county without walls pressing in. Outside, the town moved at its usual rhythm. Farm trucks hauling feed children, pedaling bikes toward school shopkeepers, unlocking doors. It looked ordinary. Yet somewhere behind those curtains of daily life, children were being moved like shadows. Jack called for Rex and drove toward the ridge overlooking the county. The wind carried the smell of pine and distant smoke. He spoke softly, half to Rex, half to himself. If it is Tom, we walk a line between justice and betrayal. If it isn't, then someone wants us to tear ourselves apart. Rex tilted his head, eyes steady. Back at the department, the forensic specialist confirmed what Jack already knew in his bones. High probability, the anonymous letter matched Tom Walker's handwriting. Jack thanked the specialist quietly, then locked the report in his drawer. He could not confront Tom yet. Confrontation without full proof could drive the man deeper, make him burn evidence, push children further from reach. He needed to test him first. That afternoon, he arranged for Tom to accompany him on a revisit to one of the earlier missing child sites, a farmhouse now empty since the family had moved. Jack watched Tom as they walked the overgrown yard, asked casual questions about recall, checked his eyes when certain details came up. Tom's answers were smooth, but too smooth. His recall too rehearsed. Jack filed it away. Rex sniffed the yard and stiffened at a corner near the barn, pawing gently at the soil. Jack crouched. A plastic fragment surfaced, part of a wristband, the kind given to children at clinics. Tom glanced at it and shrugged. Could have blown in from anywhere. He set his tone flat, his eyes a shade guarded. Jack pocketed it without response. The evidence was growing thread by thread. By dusk, Jack sat at his desk again. Files open. Rex at his side, the county map spread wide. The staged truck, the Reed house, The anonymous letter, the blood, the cloth, and now suspicion coiling inside his own department. Trust was thinning, and with it time. He stared at the map's lines and thought of how predators often hide not in forests but in uniforms among those who swear oaths. He felt the truth pressing closer, a truth that would demand both courage and sacrifice. Tomorrow would need to be measured with precision. The next step would determine whether the case moved forward or collapsed under the weight of betrayal. Rex shifted, resting his chin on Jack's boot, steady and loyal, ready to follow wherever the trail led, even into the dark. Detective Jack Miller had not spoken of his suspicions about Deputy Tom Walker to anyone, not even to the sheriff, because to move too soon would alert whoever had planted the false trail. But the weight of it rode with him as he steered the cruiser down a rutted lane toward an old warehouse at the edge of the rail spur. The address had come from a tip slipped anonymously into the department's night drop box, claiming that evidence connected to missing children could be found inside. Jack distrusted the convenience, but he could not ignore it for the trail from the Reed house, and the anonymous letter had forced his hand. Rex sat in the back seat, head lifted, nose twitching at scents carried in from the cracked window. The warehouse loomed as a hulking shadow against the fading sky, its corrugated metal skin streaked with rust, its windows broken pigeons roosting in the eaves. Jack parked with the headlights off, stepped out, and let Rex take the lead. The dog's muscles tightened with an instinct that told Jack the silence was not natural. He drew his flashlight, keeping the beam low, and guided Rex toward a side door with its padlock cut recently. Inside, the air held the heavy tang of dust layered with something sharper, metallic and electric. Boxes stood stacked in rows. Their labels faded, their contents uncertain. Rex's ears flicked forward as he pulled toward the far end where the shadows pressed deeper. Jack moved carefully, his steps soundless on the concrete eyes scanning for movement. Then Rex froze, shoulders stiff, nose pointing toward a coil of cable that trailed along the floor and vanished under a door. The dog whined low, then jerked back suddenly, teeth bared at the cable. Jack felt his gut drop. He crouched and followed the line of the wire with his light, and there it was, snaking toward a crude detonator rigged to the door's inner frame. His breath caught as he realized the truth they had been drawn here not to discover, but to be destroyed. "Back," he whispered, tugging Rex away, but as he shifted, a board creaked and the stillness shattered with the sound of a timer engaging. Rex lunged, jaws clamping on Jack's sleeve, hauling him backward with every ounce of strength, pulling him away from the door seam. The next second came a flash like a second sun, and a roar that tore the air apart. Jack felt the ground vanish. His body lifted and slammed by heat and pressure, the world drowned in thunder. He clutched Rex, shielding him as debris rained down, and the warehouse convulsed in a storm of dust and fire. When silence returned, Jack found himself sprawled outside the threshold, ears, ringing lungs burning with acrid smoke. Rex stood beside him, fur singed but eyes bright alive, steadfast. Jack staggered to his feet, gaze fixed on the inferno consuming the warehouse's back wall. The blast had gutted the structure precisely at the section that once housed an office. He recognized the layout from old inspection files. That room had been designated a records storage vault years ago, filled with archived ledgers, shipping manifests, and city planning documents. If there had been any evidence of how the abductors moved unnoticed through the county, it had burned in that fire. Jack called in the explosion with clipped words, voice low and controlled, though his chest ached. Sirens wailed in the distance, the volunteer fire crew rushing, but the flames were already devouring the roof. He guided Rex to the cruiser, checked the dog's limbs, and found no fractures, only scratches and a seared patch along his flank. He murmured praise, gratitude, deep as marrow, for without Rex's pull, he would have been inside that inferno when the charge went. As the fire crews battled the blaze, Tom Walker arrived, his face pale in the red wash of emergency lights. "What happened?" he asked, eyes darting. Jack studied him with a calm mask. "Trap," he said simply. "We were lured here, almost didn't walk away." He did not add what gnawed inside, that whoever set the trap had known the department would come, had chosen this building because of what it held. Walker pressed his lips together and nodded, but his eyes did not meet Jack's for more than a heartbeat. Jack turned back toward the blaze. Pages lifted like black birds into the night ash, spiraling high. He felt the loss keenly. The past had been erased before he could even read it. Yet the very precision of the strike told him something. The enemy feared the truth buried in those files, feared what they revealed about roots and patterns. Fear was evidence of vulnerability. He filed it away, a spark amid the ruins. Rex leaned against his leg, steadying him. The dog's fur smelled of smoke, yet his heartbeat thudded strong under Jack's hand. Together, they watched the flames collapse the last of the roof. Jack thought of the children's glove, the scrap of cloth, the letter, and now this inferno. The pattern grew clearer, each clue dangled to draw them closer, each lead a blade poised to cut. Somewhere, someone studied their every move, waiting for mistakes. He would not give them that. As the fire ebbed and the crews began dousing embers, Jack felt the night turn colder. He realized they were now fighting an adversary who lived inside the map of the county, inside its structures and histories, who could erase the past and redirect the present. The only advantage left was Rex, whose nose and instincts could not be deceived by fire or bleach. Jack placed a steadying hand on Rex's shoulder. "We're still here," he whispered. "That's what they didn't count on." In the distance, a church bell tolled midnight. The sound cut through smoke and sirens, a reminder of time moving forward. Jack knew the case was no longer about finding what had happened. It was about staying alive long enough to reach the truth. The fire at the warehouse had burned through the night, leaving twisted beams and smoking rubble by dawn. Detective Jack Miller stood with Rex at the perimeter as the fire crews cleared away the acrid smell of wet ash clinging to his jacket. He felt the loss of records like a weight in his chest. Yet there was no time to linger, for a call came through that forced his attention in a new direction. Deputies responding to an abandoned farmhouse south of town had found a frightened child locked in a root cellar, dehydrated but alive. Jack drove with urgency, the roads wet with morning dew, while Rex kept watch through the window, his ears swiveling as if measuring the county's heartbeat. At the scene, the farmhouse sagged against a line of cottonwoods, its windows blind, its paint long peeled. Deputies had cut the cellar lock and coaxed a young boy into the light. The child clung to a blanket and blinked against the sun, his face pale and his lips cracked from thirst. Jack knelt beside him, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe now," he said, gesturing toward Rex. "This is Rex. He's a friend." The dog lowered his head, tail, soft eyes, gentle. The boy's fingers reached tentatively, brushing fur, and his shoulders loosened slightly. Jack asked careful questions, each one shaped to avoid overwhelming. "Did you see who brought you here?" The boy nodded, eyes flickering with both fear and confusion. His voice cracked when he whispered, "He wore a police coat." Jack's stomach tightened. He exchanged a glance with the deputies, who shifted uneasily. The boy added, "It had a shiny badge. He told us we could trust him." Jack's pulse thudded. The boy had said us. Jack asked softly, "Were there others with you?" The child nodded again, tears filling his eyes. "3 others, but they took them away. I don't know where." Jack rose slowly, the words echoing in his mind. A police coat. A badge. The uniform of safety twisted into a lure. Rex pressed close to the boy, scenting the blanket, then looked back at Jack with intent. Jack understood the dog had found a new trail, faint but fresh. He gave Rex the command to search. The dog circled the cellar entrance, nose to ground, then moved across the yard toward the tree line. Jack followed deputies, holding back to avoid contamination. Rex stopped near a low branch and sniffed. There snagged on the bark hung a shred of navy blue cloth with a brass button attached. Jack plucked it with gloved fingers. The button bore the county insignia. He felt the chill of confirmation. Someone had access to official uniforms, or worse, someone inside had provided them. He placed the evidence in a bag and sealed it. As he turned, his radio crackled. Dispatch reported that an empty duffel bag had been found discarded near the railroad tracks a mile away. Inside lay a bundle of identical police jackets, crisp and clean badges affixed. Jack drove there immediately, Rex alert at his side. The duffel was dark canvas, its zipper broken as if torn open in haste. Jack examined the jackets. They were authentic down to the stitching. The badges gleamed, but closer inspection showed subtle flaws. Numbers, duplicated seals, slightly misaligned. They were counterfeit, manufactured with precision, but not perfection. Enough to fool a child, enough to deceive a parent at a distance, but to a trained officer, the imperfections stood out. Jack felt the anger rise, cold and sharp. The abductors had armed themselves not with weapons, but with trust, the greatest disguise of all. He imagined the scene, a man in uniform holding out a hand saying the words every child had been taught to believe. "You're safe with me." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed clarity. Rex nosed the duffel and sneezed, catching a chemical tang. Jack leaned closer and detected the faint scent of machine oil, the kind used in certain printing presses. It was a detail that mattered. He radioed for a list of local businesses with offset presses, particularly those handling uniforms or identification. As he waited, he studied the ground around the tracks. Tire impressions curved into the dirt fresh enough to read. He measured the spacing, noted the tread. A van heavy recent. The trail bent toward the service road leading back to town. He mapped it in his head. By noon, confirmation arrived. One small company on the outskirts, Mason's Supply, had both the presses and the contracts to provide signage and badges for the county. The owner, George Mason, was a respected figure who had also run the Children's Community Center for over a decade. Jack's mind tightened around the connection. Mason had both access and opportunity, yet suspicion could not become accusation without proof. Jack loaded the jackets into evidence bags, secured the duffel, and looked down at Rex. The dog's eyes burned steady, carrying both weariness and determination. Jack stroked his neck once. "They want us to doubt everyone," he said softly. "But we'll follow the truth no matter how they dress it up." The boy rescued from the cellar slept in the back of the ambulance, a blanket around his shoulders, a stuffed bear pressed to his chest. His words still echoed. He wore a police coat. Jack watched the ambulance pull away, siren quiet, only the lights marking its path. He knew the boy's statement would ripple through the department like a stone in a pond, suspicion widening in circles. Officers would look at each other differently, wondering who could be trusted. That tension would serve the abductors well if left unchecked. Jack resolved to move with caution. He would not let the department fracture under fear. Instead, he would let evidence lead, let Rex's nose cut through deception. He returned to the cruiser as the sun dipped west, painting the horizon in amber and crimson. Another layer of disguise had been stripped away. Another truth revealed the enemy wore trust as a uniform, and now the hunt had shifted toward the heart of the community. Jack adjusted the rearview mirror, saw Rex's reflection, steady, loyal, unshaken. The next move would demand even greater precision. Somewhere ahead, Mason's name waited to surface. Jack gripped the wheel tighter and drove toward the lengthening shadows. The counterfeit uniforms and the boy's terrified words had narrowed Detective Jack Miller's suspicion to a man who on the surface embodied respectability. George Mason had run the Pine County Children's Center for 12 years, his name spoken with gratitude by parents who saw him as a mentor, a figure who sponsored reading programs, youth sports, and community fairs. He shook hands at church picnics, donated supplies to schools, and wrote editorials about civic duty. Yet the evidence now stacked against him was not circumstantial. Mason's supply company had the means to manufacture badges and insignia, and his community role gave him access to vulnerable children and trusting families. Jack drove to the center with Rex in the back, his thoughts carefully measured. He had learned to distrust appearances for predators, often cloaked themselves in light. The center stood bright with murals of smiling children painted across its brick walls, its playground filled with equipment that shone freshly painted. Inside, cheerful posters lined the halls, and the scent of cleaning agents lingered too strongly, masking the natural wear of daily use. Rex's ears pricked as they entered nose-catching traces that human senses could not. Mason emerged from his office with a genial smile, his frame tall and his voice smooth. "Detective Miller, to what do I owe the visit?" His eyes flicked to Rex with polite curiosity. Jack kept his tone even. "Routine follow-up. We've had reports about counterfeit uniforms circulating. Your supply company contracts for municipal work. I'd like to ask a few questions." Mason spread his hands in mock surprise. "Of course, anything I can do. But surely you don't suspect us of anything improper. We've served this county for decades." Jack studied his mannerisms, the quick blink when uniforms were mentioned, the slight shift of weight that suggested unease. He asked about production schedules, subcontractors, and Mason answered with calm precision, almost rehearsed. Meanwhile, Rex padded toward a door half open to a storage room. Jack watched carefully as the dog stiffened at the threshold. His tail lowered, his nose pressed hard against the gap, and a low growl vibrated deep in his chest. Jack called him back, masking the signal. Mason's gaze lingered a second too long on the dog before he turned back with a smile. "Is there anything else?" Detective Jack closed his notebook slowly. "That will be all for now. Thank you for your time." He left with Rex, but the air clung heavy around him. Outside, he breathed deeper, the sunlight too bright against the certainty forming inside. Mason's composure was too perfect. The center was too polished. The traces Rex had detected inside spoke louder than smiles. That evening, Jack pulled case files again, cross-referencing. Mason's name appeared tangentially in several reports, often as the last adult seen speaking with children at events, often overlooked because of his standing. Jack dug deeper, tracing financial records. Donations to the center came from businesses with little transparency, some listed only as limited liability shells. Money moved quietly in circles, then dissolved. It was a network subtle and designed to appear benevolent. Jack's unease deepened when he mapped the incidents geographically. Each missing child had lived within a manageable distance of Mason's routes, either through the center, his supply company deliveries, or community outreach. The pattern was not coincidence. Mason was central, but he was not alone. Witness statements began to connect faint threads. A janitor at the rail yard recalled a woman in a reflective vest asking to use a side gate on the night a child disappeared. A grocer remembered a man in county maintenance gear purchasing cleaning supplies in bulk. A motel clerk described a visitor who stayed only by day, never at night, always with large duffel bags. Each detail alone meant little. Together they formed the outline of accomplices, one who provided access to secure areas, one who cleaned and erased, one who sheltered temporarily. Jack wrote them down: the informant, the cleaner, the keeper. A network under Mason's direction. Rex lay at his feet, ears twitching as if hearing the weight of the conclusion. Jack leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The trap at the warehouse had been too coordinated for one man. The counterfeit uniforms too detailed to be a single hand. This was not just Mason, it was Mason at the center of a wheel, spokes reaching out into places ordinary and trusted. The realization brought both clarity and dread. Taking Mason alone would not dismantle the structure. It would only drive the others underground. Jack knew he needed to map each connection to watch longer, to allow the network to reveal its rhythms. The sheriff pressed him for results, the town anxious for reassurance, but Jack held the line. He spoke only of ongoing investigation, while privately he tightened his circle to Rex alone. That night he drove past the center again, parking down the block with lights off. Through the windows he saw Mason at his desk phone pressed to his ear, Gesture's sharp face unguarded now that no one watched. Jack lifted binoculars and read the tension in those movements, the way Mason slammed a drawer, the way his lips tightened. He could not hear the words, but the body language spoke of command and control. When Mason finally left, locking the door behind him, he carried a briefcase heavy enough to pull his arm. Jack marked the time. Mason was moving after hours, likely meeting others. The chase was beginning to shift from evidence to pursuit. Jack placed a hand on Rex, whose eyes reflected streetlight like two embers. "He's the center," Jack whispered. "But the spokes are moving too. We'll need to be ready when they surface." Rex leaned into him, solid and unwavering. The night felt colder, but the path ahead had taken shape. Detective Jack Miller had spent 3 nights mapping George Mason's movements, watching him leave the Children's Center after hours, sometimes driving out of town along service roads, sometimes returning with his briefcase heavier than when he left. Each time Mason's smile in public grew wider, his gestures warmer, but Jack saw the mask now for what it was. The evidence was not yet enough to move on Mason directly, but Rex gave Jack reason to push harder. During a quiet inspection of the Children's Center storage room where Rex had first stiffened weeks before, the German Shepherd nosed his way into a corner piled with donations, stuffed animals, dolls, puzzles. Jack allowed him to search, and Rex fixated on one doll, a faded cloth bear with a torn seam. Jack lifted it carefully, fingers probing the stitched opening. Inside, he felt a foreign object. He extracted a tiny memory card wrapped in tape. His pulse steadied into steel. Someone had hidden this where only a dog's nose could find it. At the station, he placed the card into an evidence reader. The screen flickered, then filled with images that made his chest constrict. The video showed a dim underground room walls of concrete light flickering from a single bulb. 4 children sat huddled on cots, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, but alive. A clock on the wall marked time its second hand sweeping. Jack's throat tightened as he noted details. A drainage pipe visible in the corner, a patch of graffiti half erased the hum of distant machinery, faint but constant. Then the overlay appeared. GPS coordinates blinking at the top of the video, precise numbers leading to a location on the county's map. Jack leaned closer, studying, recording every detail. He called the sheriff, called Tom Walker, and within the hour, a convoy of cruisers moved toward the coordinates. Jack drove with Rex pressed against the window, the dog's breath quick and sharp. The site turned out to be an abandoned grain silo on the outskirts, its metal frame, rusting doors chained but easy to breach. Officers fanned out floodlights, cutting the night. They broke the lock, stormed inside, and found nothing. The silo was empty except for a few crates and wind stirring dust. Jack moved through with practiced, calm eyes, scanning for any trace. Rex circled nose sweeping but gave no bark, no signal of human presence. The silo was a shell allure. The GPS had been embedded into the video as bait, drawing every resource to a dead end. Jack felt the realization settle heavy as iron. Mason's network had anticipated their hunger for proof and had played it perfectly. While officers searched fruitlessly, Mason and his accomplices had time to move to erase, to deepen their concealment. Jack walked out into the night air, fists clenched against the frustration. Rex pressed close, sensing the tension. Jack knelt and steadied his breathing, pressing his hand against Rex's collar. "You found the truth once. We'll find it again," he murmured. He returned to the cruiser, reviewing the video frame by frame. Something nagged him. The clock, the graffiti, the hum. These were not staged details. They were real, captured somewhere, but masked by false coordinates. He called the forensic tech, demanding an analysis of the metadata. Minutes stretched the convoy, waiting in uneasy silence. Finally, the tech reported back. The GPS data did not align with the file's timestamps. They had been edited in layered after recording. The original location data had been stripped, but traces remained in the digital residue. The tech promised to rebuild what fragments he could. Jack felt both anger and respect toward the cunning of the network. They had forced the department to chase shadows to waste hours. But in doing so, they had exposed themselves because someone had risked hiding the card inside the center where Rex alone could find it. That meant dissent within the network, a hand slipping evidence to the side of light. Jack returned to the Children's Center the next day under pretense of routine inspection. He moved through the rooms quietly, watching staff. A volunteer avoided his gaze, her hands trembling as she arranged toys. Jack took note. Perhaps she had left the card, perhaps another had, but someone wanted the truth discovered. Rex trailed through the hall, pausing at doors, nose busy. He paused near Mason's office, ears rising, then moved on. Jack knew the office would hold more answers, but to press now would force Mason's hand. Instead, he let Rex lead him to the storage room again. The dog circled the shelves and sat firmly before a stack of paint cans. Jack examined them. One can bore a broken seal inside, not paint, but rags soaked with chemical cleaner. Whoever had scrubbed the Reed house might have stood in this very room preparing. Another thread, another spoke of the wheel. Jack returned to his desk that evening with the memory card secured, the video copied, the false coordinates mapped. He spread the county grid again, noting every underground structure, drainage tunnels, storm shelters, basements of old schools. Somewhere among them matched the details in the video. He would find it. Rex lay at his feet, weary but watchful. Jack felt his loyalty like a quiet anchor. The enemy had tested them with misdirection, but misdirection was also confession. It meant the truth was too dangerous for Mason's network to reveal. That truth still waited in the dark, children still huddled in a real basement clock still ticking. Jack swore silently he would reach them before time ran out. Detective Jack Miller sat hunched over the county maps until his eyes blurred, tracing each line of tunnels, storm drains, and decommissioned rail spurs, searching for the details from the video, the drainage pipe, the graffiti, the low hum of machinery. Rex dozed at his feet, ears twitching even in sleep, attuned to his handler's unease. Near midnight, the forensic tech called back with partial recovery from the memory card. Though the GPS coordinates had been falsified, fragments of cell tower data hinted at a location near the old textile mill east of town, a sprawling ruin abandoned after the industry collapsed. Jack felt the pieces align underground space machinery hum graffiti left from vagrants. He rose at once, and Rex stood ready, his tail a steady rhythm of focus. At dawn, Jack drove to the site, the mill's red brick walls looming against the pale sky, its broken windows staring like empty eyes. The place smelled of rust and mildew, its silence broken only by the drip of water from cracked gutters. He parked a distance away and approached on foot, Rex at his side, the dog's nose busy with scents no human could track. They entered through a collapsed doorway. Inside, dust filmed the floor, but faint scuffs marked where something heavy had been dragged. Rex's head lifted, body stiffening, nose turning toward the far wall where shadows pooled. Jack swept his light across the bricks and saw it a seam too straight, a discoloration too precise. He pressed the wall and felt a faint draft. Rex pawed at the seam nails, scraping stone. Jack searched and found a concealed latch, rusted but functional. With effort he pulled, and the wall panel shifted inward with a groan, revealing a narrow passage leading down into darkness. A hidden tunnel built perhaps for utility lines or smuggling, now repurposed. Jack whispered praise to Rex, then drew his weapon and descended, careful of each step. The air cooled sharply, carrying the smell of damp earth and oil. Rex moved ahead, nose low, tail rigid, every sense alive. The tunnel sloped downward, then curved until Jack saw faint light and heard the low rumble of engines. He approached cautiously, peering through a grated opening. Beyond lay an old rail spur, its tracks still intact, leading into a cavernous chamber where freight cars sat waiting. Men moved in the shadows, their jackets marked with counterfeit badges, their voices echoing. Jack's heart clenched when he saw small figures ushered into one of the boxcars, children frightened and silent, their faces pale in the dim light. He counted 4, maybe 5, pushed inside under the pretense of safety. The abductors worked with grim efficiency, securing doors, checking locks. A generator hummed nearby, powering floodlights. Jack realized with a chill what this meant. Mason's network was preparing to move the children out of the county entirely. Once loaded onto freight and carried through dormant lines, they would vanish like smoke transformed into ghosts no one could trace. Jack stepped back, pulse hammering, mind racing. He radioed a coded message to dispatch requesting backup to converge silently. He knew minutes mattered. Rex pressed against his leg, eyes locked on the movement beyond the grate. Jack whispered, "Not yet, partner. Wait." The dog trembled with restrained energy, ready to strike. Jack studied the chamber again. The abductors carried no obvious firearms, but wielded authority like weapons, their counterfeit uniforms convincing at a glance. To a child, they looked like saviors, not predators. The cruelty of that disguise tightened Jack's chest. He noted the exit routes, one main tunnel for trucks, one rail line heading north. The plan was clear. Load children, drive the cars along the spur to where they could merge with active freight, then disappear. Jack weighed options. To rush in alone was suicide. To wait too long risked losing the children forever. He turned to Rex, whispering, "We buy time." He pulled a flare from his belt and scratched it to life, tossing it into a side corridor. The hiss and glow drew one of the men to investigate confusion, breaking the rhythm. Rex seized the cue, slipping through the grate as Jack pried it open wider. The dog moved like a shadow, low and silent, until he lunged at the nearest man, dragging him down before an alarm could rise. Jack surged in behind weapon raised, shouting commands that echoed like thunder. Chaos erupted. The abductors scrambled, children screamed. The generator buzzed louder as if in panic. Rex tore through confusion, forcing men back, his body a blur of muscle and resolve. Jack advanced with steady precision, disarming one man, pinning another. He shouted to the children to stay low, his voice cutting through the din with authority they could finally trust. Sirens wailed, faint in the distance, backup racing, but time stretched as if fragile. One man broke for the rail switch, intent on setting the cars in motion. Jack fired a warning shot that sparked off steel, forcing him down. Rex intercepted another who tried to drag a child deeper into the shadows. The dog's jaws clamped, holding fast, eyes burning with fury, not of rage, but of protection. By the time deputies poured in, the chamber was secure. The abductors restrained the children, pulled from the cars into waiting arms. Jack exhaled, his chest heavy with both relief and dread. This was only a fraction. Mason was not here, and the operation bore his fingerprints nonetheless. The children sobbed into blankets, their small hands gripping tightly, unwilling to release the officers who held them. Rex stood amid them, panting, his coat dusted with dirt, but his eyes calm now, as if assuring them. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good work, partner." Yet he knew the fight was not done. Mason's network would not collapse so easily. The children saved tonight were proof of life, but others still waited in unseen rooms, clocks ticking, ghosts waiting to be born. Jack looked down the rail line, vanishing into darkness, and swore silently that Mason would not use it again. The pursuit had only begun. The raid in the underground rail chamber had given Detective Jack Miller a temporary victory. But as he stood among the rescued children wrapped in emergency blankets, his eyes kept flicking to the dark rails stretching into the earth. George Mason was not there, and Jack knew a man who controlled such a network would never leave himself vulnerable. He would already be planning the next move. Rex limped slightly from exhaustion, yet kept close, nose still twitching for traces. Deputies processed the scene, but Jack refused to relax. He had seen operations collapse into false relief before. He decided to push farther down the spur with Rex alone, scanning for any evidence of where the trains might next connect. They moved through the narrow tunnel, flashlight beams cutting arcs against damp stone. The silence pressed heavy until Rex stiffened suddenly, ears forward, tail rigid. He growled low, and Jack immediately crouched. A shadow shifted ahead, followed by the crack of a gunshot. The bullet ricocheted off metal, and Jack pulled Rex down behind a steel column. The shooter fled deeper into the tunnel. Jack advanced cautiously, weapon raised, Rex pressed against his leg. Another shot rang out, and this time Rex yelped, stumbling as blood darkened his flank. Jack's heart clenched, but Rex steadied himself, eyes sharp with determination. Jack wanted to pull him back, but the dog strained forward, insistent. He sniffed the air and pushed on, leaving a faint trail of blood drops, yet his will unbroken. They followed until the tunnel widened into another chamber where a freight car stood half-concealed. Rex pulled toward it, nose urgent even as his steps faltered. Jack swung the door open and found 3 children huddled inside, terrified, their wrists bound with duct tape. He rushed them out, cutting restraints, and called for deputies to escort them to safety. Rex collapsed briefly but pushed himself up again, panting heavily, his eyes still tracking the tunnel. Jack knelt, pressing a hand against his wound, whispering praise. "You did it, partner. You found them." Rex licked his hand once and tried to rise again, unwilling to stop. Jack carried him a few paces until Rex wriggled free, determined to walk on his own. Sirens echoed faintly through the underground maze as more units poured in. Yet, amid the noise, Jack sensed movement, the kind of deliberate withdrawal that marked an orchestrator slipping away while chaos reigned. He turned just in time to glimpse a figure at the far exit, briefcase in hand, face half-concealed but unmistakably George Mason. Jack shouted and gave chase, adrenaline pushing him past fatigue. Rex followed despite pain, his gait uneven but relentless. Mason darted through a service door into open night where a truck idled with engine running. He dropped the briefcase and raised a pistol, aiming not at Jack but at Rex. Jack fired first, striking the truck's fender, forcing Mason to pivot. Mason cursed under his breath, his face twisting with fury, and shifted aim toward Jack. The gun flashed and Jack dove behind a concrete barrier as sparks burst. The sound of deputies arriving grew nearer, but Mason knew he had seconds before being cornered. He lunged forward, closing the gap, intent on silencing Jack before witnesses arrived. Rex, though bleeding, surged ahead with a final burst of strength, intercepting Mason's advance. He leapt, teeth clamping Mason's arm, wrenching the weapon aside. The shot went wide into the night. Mason roared with rage, struggling to shake the dog off. Jack rose and closed the distance, knocking Mason to the ground, wrenching the gun free. Deputies swarmed moments later, restraining the accomplices who tried to flee with the truck. In the chaos, Mason twisted from Jack's grasp, rolling toward the shadows, then disappearing into the maze of alleys behind the mill. The night swallowed him before pursuit could be coordinated. Jack stood panting, gun heavy in his hand. Rex collapsed against his boot. The dog's chest heaved, his blood staining the dirt, but his eyes stayed locked on Jack, unwavering, as if to say the fight was not yet done. Paramedics rushed to stabilize Rex, lifting him carefully. Jack knelt close, stroking his head. "Hold on, partner. You brought them home." Rex blinked slowly, his breath shallow yet steady. The rescued children were carried into ambulances, their small hands reaching for officers as they passed. Their lives had been spared by Rex's persistence, by his nose, by his courage. Jack felt both pride and dread, pride for what had been saved, dread for what had slipped away. George Mason had nearly succeeded in erasing every trace, had nearly ended both Jack and Rex. Now he was loose, more dangerous than ever, cornered yet unbroken. Jack rose slowly, scanning the dark where Mason had fled the night, whispering with the promise of another confrontation. He swore silently that the next time would not end in escape. Rex's stretcher lifted into the ambulance, sirens ready. Jack followed close, his heart heavy but resolute. The battle had cost blood, yet it had saved innocence. The chase was not finished. It had only sharpened. The hunt for George Mason stretched into days that bled into nights, each hour pulling Detective Jack Miller deeper into the strain of exhaustion, yet the image of Mason slipping into the shadows haunted him more than fatigue. Rex remained under medical care, his flank stitched, his breathing shallow but steady, and though the vet urged rest, Rex's eyes never wavered from Jack, as if the dog knew the fight had not yet ended. Jack stayed close, briefing deputies, analyzing maps, and tracing Mason's possible routes. The town lived in unease, parents clutching their children tighter, neighbors eyeing each other with suspicion, yet hope had not vanished because they had seen Rex bleed to protect the innocent, and that courage spread like quiet fire. On the fourth night after Mason's escape, a call came from a night watchman at the old courthouse annex. He had seen a figure forcing entry carrying a case. Jack's heart, stilled with recognition for Mason's arrogance, was now desperation. Jack drove with lights off, Rex at his side, despite the fresh wound, the dog insistent, unwilling to remain behind. They approached the annex, its stone walls cold in the moonlight, windows high and dark. Jack and Rex moved silently, entering through a side door, ears tuned to the faint scrape of movement above. In the main hall, Mason stood at the judge's bench, setting papers ablaze in a metal bin, the glow casting his face in harsh relief. His briefcase lay open, filled with files Jack had never seen, records of children cataloged like inventory-coded notes about transport routes. Mason turned as Jack leveled his weapon. His smile was cold. "You're too late, Miller. By morning, none of this will matter." He drew a pistol from beneath his coat, his hand steady with calculation. Jack commanded him to drop it, but Mason stepped aside, forcing the line of fire toward Jack's chest. In that instant, the room seemed suspended in silence until Rex surged forward, despite pain and weakness, placing himself between handler and threat. The gun fired, the sound sharp as lightning and stone. The bullet struck Rex square, and the dog collapsed against Jack's boots, his eyes burning still with fierce loyalty. Jack's heart shattered, but his focus hardened. He returned fire, striking Mason's arm, sending the pistol clattering. Deputies burst in from the rear entrance, seizing Mason before he could recover. He fought with venom, shouting words meant to shake the room, but the fight was over. Jack dropped to his knees beside Rex, pressing hands against the wound, whispering praise and desperate comfort. "You did it, partner. You kept me safe. You saved them all." Rex's breath came slow, his gaze locked on Jack's, his tail thumping once, faint but resolute. Jack felt the moment stretch into eternity, then soften, as Rex exhaled one last time, his body going still but his spirit lingering in the silence. Jack bowed his head, tears falling into the fur of the one who had stood against darkness without hesitation. Deputies carried Mason away in cuffs, his network dismantled piece by piece in the days that followed. Files recovered from the briefcase confirmed the scope of his crimes, and testimony from rescued children tied him to every act. The trial that came months later condemned him to life without freedom, yet even that victory felt hollow compared to the loss. The town gathered weeks afterward in the central square, families of the rescued children, standing together, candles glowing in their hands. A bronze statue was unveiled, crafted swiftly by local artists who had worked day and night. It showed Rex standing tall, ears forward, eyes fixed on a point beyond his form, eternal in courage. At the base, the inscription read, "The Silent Guardian. Loyalty without fear, courage without end." Jack stood before it, his uniform pressed his heart heavy yet proud. The children placed flowers at the statue's paws, their small voices whispering thanks. Jack touched the cold bronze and whispered, "You'll always be with me, partner." The town bells tolled, the sound carrying over rooftops, a reminder that sacrifice had meaning, that one dog's bravery had saved not only lives, but faith itself. Jack walked away into the evening light, the statue behind him, the memory before him carrying both grief and gratitude. The case had closed, the evil unmasked, Yet the bond between man and dog had written a story into the town's soul that would never be forgotten. The battle between good and evil in Pine County leaves one question. What detail shocked you most? Was it the staged truck, the underground rail line, or the betrayal within the police force? Share your answer below along with the city or town you're watching from. And if you want to hear more powerful, true-style stories, make sure to like and subscribe.